The morning fog clung to the windows of the Cole residence, high on the hill overlooking the Seattle Bay. Inside, silence had become the air itself, measured, predictable, and heavy. For 3 years, Mia Reyes had lived in that silence like a ghost in someone else's home. Every day was the same. Nathan left at 6. She came down at 6:15, just late enough to avoid him. She would eat alone at the marble counter, pretending the chair across from her didn't belong to a husband she hadn't really met, even after 3 years of marriage. Marriage. The word still felt foreign. To her, it was a contract, inked to rescue her parents' small accounting firm when it drowned in debt. To him, it was a line item in a business strategy, a merger sealed with a ring instead of a signature. No one mentioned love. No one expected it. Mia used to imagine she'd get used to it. The polite distance, the cold dinners, the invisible wall that cut her life in two. But no one gets used to being unseen. You just learn to breathe quietly behind the glass. That morning, she moved like she always did. Quiet steps, tied hair, sleeves rolled up. The kitchen smelled of coffee and order. She had exactly 15 minutes to eat before the sound of his shoes on the stairs, her unspoken alarm clock, told her to disappear. But that day, the rhythm broke. When she entered the kitchen, Nathan was already there. He stood by the espresso machine, silver cufflinks glinting against his charcoal suit. The early light framed him like a painting of control, composed, immaculate, untouchable. For a moment, she froze. In 3 years, they had exchanged maybe 50 words. Most of them about logistics, bills, events, taxes, never feelings. She opened her mouth to greet him, but he spoke first. Mia. Her name sounded strange in his voice, like a foreign word he wasn't used to pronouncing. She turned, startled. Yes? Nathan didn't look at her immediately. He fixed his tie, then said flatly, Do you have something suitable to wear to a corporate gala? Mia blinked, unsure she'd heard right. What kind of gala? Tomorrow night, he continued, tone clipped. Investors from Europe. I need to appear with my wife. Her wife. Not with you, not by my side, just the position filled. For 3 years, Nathan Cole, 32, CEO of one of Seattle's largest logistics networks, had treated her as a polite placeholder. Now, suddenly, she was useful again. An accessory for reputation. Mia forced herself to answer calmly. And if I say no? He looked up then, eyes a sharp gray under the morning light. That wouldn't be wise. Wise? She repeated, a small bitter laugh escaping her. Is that what this marriage is? Wisdom? Nathan's jaw tightened. This event matters. Appearances matter. I expect you to be there. She could have argued. She could have reminded him that appearances hadn't mattered to him the past 3 years. When she dined alone, when he walked past her like she was air. But something in her snapped differently this time. She smiled, calm, almost amused. I'll go, she said softly. Nathan paused, as if the ease of her reply unsettled him. Good. I'm not going because you expect it, she added. I'm going because I'm curious. He frowned slightly. Curious? Yes, she said, to finally see the world that was more important than me. For a second, his gaze lingered, caught between confusion and something unreadable. Then, as always, he straightened his shoulders and retreated behind his professional tone. 7 o'clock, be ready. He picked up his coffee, nodded once, and left the room. The echo of his footsteps filled the space he'd left behind. Measured, fading, final. Mia exhaled slowly. Curiosity. It wasn't anger that pulsed in her chest. It was hunger. A hunger to be seen, even for a moment. To step out of invisibility, even if only into a room full of strangers. She finished her coffee in silence, her reflection faint in the glass window, half of her face bathed in light, the other half swallowed by shadow. Upstairs, Nathan paused on the landing. For the first time in 3 years, he found himself thinking about her voice, how steady it sounded when she said she'd go, how her eyes didn't tremble like they used to. He told himself it didn't mean anything. He told himself it was just an event. But the truth lodged somewhere in his chest, sharp and unfamiliar. In 3 years, he had built an empire of efficiency. Every second of his life scheduled, predictable, controllable. Except the moment she said, I'm curious. That single word cracked something he didn't know could break. Mia climbed the stairs slowly, the morning light following her up each step like a witness. In her room, she opened her old wardrobe, the one she hadn't touched in years, and ran her fingers along the row of dresses that had forgotten what it felt like to be worn. At the back, she found one wrapped in plastic, a deep moss green gown, simple, timeless. She had bought it before the wedding, back when she still thought she might have a social life, maybe even a partner who'd see her. The tag was still attached. 3 years later, it still fit. As she held it against herself in the mirror, she didn't see the quiet girl who had signed her life away for her parents' mistakes. She saw someone else, someone who could walk into a room full of powerful men and not shrink, someone who didn't need permission to exist. The thought scared her and thrilled her. Downstairs, the bay fog began to lift, revealing the city below. From his study, Nathan glanced out the same window. For reasons he couldn't explain, he wondered what she was thinking, what she would wear, why suddenly he cared. Outside, the sun rose fully, cutting through the last of the mist, one half of the house in gold, the other still in gray. Between them, an invisible line held, 3 years of silence ready to break. Tomorrow night, for the first time since the wedding, they would stand side by side in public. To everyone else, it would look like a marriage. Only they would know the truth, that it was just the beginning of something neither of them had planned. The next evening, the mansion glowed under amber light spilling from its tall windows. Mia stood at the top of the staircase, one hand resting on the railing, steadying her breath. The dress, the deep moss-green silk she had found in the back of her closet, flowed like quiet water around her legs. It was elegant but simple, the kind of beauty that didn't ask for attention but earned it. Downstairs, Nathan adjusted his cufflinks beside the door, checking his watch as if he could measure time back into order. When he finally looked up and saw her descending, he froze. For a moment, the sound of her heels on the steps filled the room like a heartbeat. He had seen her every day for 3 years, but had somehow never looked. There was something new in her. No, not new, simply something he had been blind to. "You look appropriate," he said at last, his voice too even to hide the small crack of surprise behind it. Mia's lips curved slightly. "Thank you, Mr. Cole. I practice being appropriate." He didn't respond. Instead, he picked up his keys, opening the door for her. For the first time, they left the house together, side by side. Not as partners, but as two strangers playing their assigned roles. The gala was held at the Harbor Museum of Contemporary Art, perched over the bay like a glass jewel. Inside, crystal chandeliers dripped golden light across polished marble floors. Everywhere Mia looked, people shimmered. Women in metallic gowns, men in tuxedos with perfect smiles. She followed half a step behind Nathan, her posture graceful, her face calm. She could feel the gazes of strangers, curiosity, envy, calculation. To them, she was the mysterious Mrs. Cole, wife of the youngest CEO in the city. To herself, she was a ghost wrapped in silk, haunting someone else's success story. "Stay close," Nathan murmured as they entered the main hall. "Smile, but don't speak about work unless asked." "Understood," she said lightly, silent, decorative, efficient. He glanced at her, but her eyes were on the chandelier above, pretending not to see the irritation flicker across his face. The evening unfolded in a blur of polite laughter and corporate diplomacy. Nathan shook hands, accepted congratulations, and exchanged strategic pleasantries. Mia stood beside him like part of the scenery, her practiced smile gentle, her silence polished. Every once in a while, she caught fragments of conversations that sounded like another language: profits, shares, mergers, projections. When her mind began to drift, she moved quietly toward the bar for a glass of sparkling water. The bartender smiled, pouring it into crystal. She took a sip, letting the bubbles sting her tongue, a reminder that she still existed, still had texture. "Mrs. Cole," she turned. A tall man with an easy smile and a tuxedo that fit him like confidence itself, extended his hand. "I'm Daniel Ward," he said, "investor from Madrid. I believe your husband mentioned you earlier." Mia blinked. "Did he?" Daniel chuckled. "Only briefly. He said you preferred privacy. I can respect that. Though I must admit I'm surprised. He never mentioned you spoke Spanish." Mia's lips parted in surprise. "He wouldn't know." Daniel tilted his head, intrigued. Then, in fluent Spanish, he said, "Así que lo hablas con fluidez?" "So, you speak it fluently?" She smiled, replying in the same language, "Y también francés, si quiere comprobarlo." "And French too, if you'd like to test me." His eyes brightened. Magnificent. Finally, someone I can talk to without translating everything twice. The conversation flowed easily. Daniel had the kind of charm that didn't feel forced. He asked questions about her travels, her work before marriage, her opinions about the Latin American market. And for the first time in years, Mia spoke about her own life without lowering her voice or apologizing for it. I used to work in international consulting, she explained. Emerging markets, cross-border negotiations. I loved it. It made the world feel connected. I can tell, Daniel said. There's fire in the way you talk about it. Fire. She hadn't heard that word used about her in a long time. Across the room, Nathan was deep in conversation with a group of investors. But something, perhaps instinct, perhaps the sudden quiet where his wife's presence had been, made him glance toward the bar. He saw Daniel Ward leaning slightly closer to Mia, laughing. He saw Mia smile, a real smile, not the polite one she wore beside him. And for the first time in 3 years, Nathan felt something sharp move under his ribs. Jealousy was a language he didn't speak, but somehow he understood every word. When Daniel mentioned dinner, it sounded casual, professional even. I'm meeting a few partners tomorrow, he said. We're reviewing some potential expansions in South America. Honestly, I could use someone who actually understands the culture instead of just the numbers. Would you join us? I'd love your perspective. Before Mia could answer, a voice cut in. She won't be available. Nathan appeared beside her, holding a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. His tone was calm, but the edges were iron. Daniel turned, unruffled. Nathan, good to see you. I was just extending an invitation. Professional curiosity only. I'm sure, Nathan said, his smile thin. But Mia doesn't work. Daniel raised an eyebrow. That's a shame. She seems incredibly capable and passionate. Mia set her glass down, her pulse quickening. I can speak for myself, Nathan. He looked at her, a silent warning in his eyes, but she didn't look away this time. It was a kind offer, Mr. Ward. I'll think about it. Excellent, Daniel said, catching the undercurrent between them. Then I'll leave you two to enjoy the evening. He bowed slightly and disappeared back into the crowd. Nathan waited until he was out of earshot before speaking. That was unnecessary. What was? The flirting. Mia let out a quiet laugh. You think I was flirting? I think you enjoyed the attention, he replied coolly. She turned toward him, eyes clear and steady. After 3 years of being invisible, forgive me for remembering what it feels like to be noticed. The words landed like a quiet blow. Nathan's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. For the rest of the night, he didn't stray far from her side. Every time Daniel passed by, Nathan's hand found the small of Mia's back. Not possessive, exactly, but protective in a way that burned through his usual composure. And Mia, though she didn't admit it, felt her heartbeat rise each time his fingers brushed against her dress. When the gala finally ended, the car ride home was thick with unspoken tension. The city lights flickered across Nathan's face, gold, then shadow, then gold again. Mia looked out the window, her reflection overlapping his in the glass. They looked like two halves of a photograph that had never quite been aligned. He broke the silence first. You shouldn't have encouraged him. She smiled faintly, still watching the city blur by. You shouldn't have waited 3 years to care. Nathan didn't answer. He didn't know how. All he knew was that something had shifted, subtle but irreversible. When they reached the house, he opened the car door for her. Mia stepped out without a word, walking toward the front steps as the wind from the bay caught her hair. Behind her, Nathan watched, the same way he had all night, finally seeing, the woman he had married but never known. Inside, the lights flickered against the glass, reflecting 2 distant silhouettes under the same roof, each wondering when silence had turned into something they could no longer control. The rain had been falling since dawn, thin, steady, whispering against the tall windows of the coal house. Mia sat at the kitchen counter, both hands around a steaming mug, watching the gray world blur outside. Seattle had a way of matching her mood, calm on the surface, but always ready to pour. She thought she was alone. Nathan usually left by 6, right after his first call with Tokyo. It was part of their unspoken choreography, the distance so carefully maintained that it almost looked like harmony. But when she turned, he was there, leaning against the counter by the espresso machine, arms crossed, tie loosened. He wasn't supposed to be. Mia blinked once. You're still here. I postponed my morning meeting. His voice was calm, but it carried an unfamiliar weight. He was watching her, not the rain, not his watch, her. Why? She asked. Nathan didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked toward her cup, then back to her face. Were you planning to see Daniel Ward again? The question hung in the air like static. Mia set her mug down carefully. I was. He straightened slightly. Why? Because he offered me a professional opportunity, she said evenly. And because it's been a long time since anyone asked what I'm capable of. Nathan's jaw flexed. You don't need to work. Everything you want is already here. Everything you think I should want, she corrected softly. The rain outside intensified, as if echoing her voice. Nathan took a slow breath, trying to steady his tone. Mia, that man's not offering a job. She cut in. He's offering respect, Nathan. Something I haven't had in this house for 3 years. Silence. Only the hum of the coffee machine filled the gap between them. He stepped forward. You think I don't respect you? I think you don't know me. Her eyes met his. Calm, but cutting. In 3 years, have you ever asked what I studied? What I did before I became Mrs. Cole? He hesitated. You majored in business? She gave a small, bitter laugh. No, economics, master's degree. I specialized in emerging markets. I worked for a consulting firm before this marriage turned me into a household accessory. Nathan's expression shifted, a mix of discomfort and realization. I didn't know, he said finally. That's the point. Mia's voice trembled slightly, but she steadied it. You never asked. You never cared to know who I was before your signature swallowed me whole. Nathan looked away, staring at the counter as if it might offer an escape. He wasn't used to losing control of a conversation, not in boardrooms, and certainly not in his own home. After a long moment, he said quietly, I didn't mean to make you feel small. You didn't have to mean it, she replied. You just had to live it. He ran a hand through his hair, a rare sign of frustration. Last night, he said finally, when I saw him talking to you, when I saw you smile, I didn't like it. You mean when I acted human? When you acted like you belonged to someone else. The words slipped out before he could pull them back. Mia's eyes narrowed. Belonged? Nathan exhaled sharply, realizing how it sounded. That's not what I... No, it's exactly what you meant. Her voice sharpened. You've ignored me for 3 years, and now that another man notices I exist, suddenly I'm your possession? That's not it. Then what is it, Nathan? What is this sudden interest? Guilt? Jealousy? Or is it just the inconvenience of losing control? The calm she'd held all morning began to crack. You can't pick up a marriage the way you pick up a briefcase. You can't claim me now just because someone else saw what you threw away. For a long second, neither spoke. The only sound was the soft tick of the kitchen clock and the hiss of rain against glass. Finally, Nathan said quietly, I'm not used to this, to feeling displaced. Displaced, she repeated. That's what I was for 3 years, Nathan. A placeholder for an image you needed to maintain. He looked at her then, really looked, and something flickered behind his gray eyes. It wasn't pride this time. It was something closer to fear. I don't want to lose you, he said. Mia's voice softened, but her resolve didn't. You can't lose what you never tried to hold. Nathan took a step closer, resting his hands on the counter between them. Mia, last night I realized something. When I saw him with you, I felt angry. I didn't understand it at first, but now I think I do. What did you feel? Jealousy, he admitted, his tone rougher than usual. I don't like that he saw something in you before I did, that he saw you at all. Her gaze stayed steady. Maybe you should ask yourself why it took another man for you to finally notice your wife. Nathan looked down. You're right. The honesty in his voice caught her off guard. He rarely admitted fault, but she didn't let the softness in his tone distract her from what mattered. I'm meeting him tonight, she said simply. Nathan's head snapped up. You're what? I'm meeting Daniel for dinner, to discuss the job. He stepped closer, tension tightening every muscle. After all this? Yes, because it's my choice, for once. He stared at her, searching for something to say that wouldn't sound like an order. But all his sentences had been built from control, and control no longer worked here. Mia, please, he said quietly, don't go. She shook her head. For 3 years, you told me what to wear, where to stand, when to smile. I'm done letting you tell me when to breathe. Nathan's lips parted as if to respond, but she didn't wait. She picked up her empty mug and placed it gently in the sink, her movements calm, deliberate. "Whatever you're trying to fix," she said softly, "you can't do it by owning me. You'll have to start by seeing me." Then she walked past him, her steps light but final. Nathan stood there, motionless, his reflection caught in the glossy surface of the counter. A man surrounded by everything he'd built, realizing he didn't know how to hold the one thing that mattered. Outside, the rain had eased, but the air still trembled with thunder somewhere far off. He could feel it, a storm coming, one he'd caused but didn't yet know how to survive. Upstairs, Mia opened her closet and pulled out her coat. For the first time in 3 years, her hands didn't shake while getting ready. This dinner wasn't about Daniel, not really. It was about choosing herself. Downstairs, Nathan finally moved, reaching for his coffee cup, but it had gone cold. He stared out of the same window she had earlier, at the faint reflection of his own face beside the gray sky. It looked unfamiliar, a man stripped of his armor, uncertain whether the next move would cost him the one thing he'd never learned how to love properly until now. The restaurant sat halfway up the hill, its brick walls softened by vines and yellow light. It wasn't the kind of place that made headlines. No valet, no marble floors, no boardroom conversations leaking from the tables. It was warm, human, the kind of place that still believed in slow dinners and honest laughter. Daniel had chosen it deliberately. When Mia arrived, wrapped in a beige coat, the city lights behind her shimmered like a quiet ocean. He stood to greet her, smiling easily. "You came." She smiled back, though her nerves betrayed her hands. "I said I would." As they sat, a small candle flickered between them, throwing gold over the silverware. For the first time in a long while, Mia wasn't the quiet half of someone else's evening. Daniel started softly, steering the conversation away from small talk. "So, tell me more about the work you did before. All this," he said, gesturing vaguely, not at her marriage, but at the life that had swallowed her. Mia hesitated, then laughed under her breath. "It feels like another lifetime. Then bring it back to life for me." She leaned back slightly, tracing the rim of her glass. "I worked for an international consulting firm based in Lima. We handled infrastructure projects across Chile and Peru, renewable energy, logistics integration, supply chain restructuring. I managed the data analysis for cross-border teams." Daniel listened, not interrupting. When she finished, he said simply, "You light up when you talk about it." Mia blinked, caught off guard. "I do?" "Yes," he said, smiling. "You lean forward without realizing it. That's the kind of energy I look for in my partners. People who remember why they started before they remember what they're paid." His compliment wasn't flirtatious. It was respectful. And that made it cut deeper. For years, Mia had only heard what she owed. To her parents, to her husband, to the image of perfection she had to uphold. No one had asked what she wanted. "Honestly," Daniel said, swirling his wine, "I could use someone like you. I'm expanding the firm's South American portfolio. We need a consultant who understands not just the numbers, but the people. You clearly do." Mia tilted her head. "That's kind of you." "It's practical," he replied. "Talent like yours shouldn't be collecting dust." She laughed softly. "It's been a while since anyone called me talented." Daniel's gaze softened. "That says more about the people around you than about you." For a moment, the words hung between them, fragile and warm. And then, behind Daniel, the air seemed to shift. Mia noticed the reflection first, a silhouette in the restaurant's glass door. Tall, familiar, uninvited. Nathan. He wasn't wearing a jacket, just a white shirt with the sleeves rolled to his forearms. His tie was gone, his expression unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders told her everything. He had come here. Mia's breath caught. "Oh no," she whispered. Daniel turned slightly. "Friend of yours?" "Something like that," she murmured. Nathan stepped closer to their table, his voice even but tight. "Good evening." Daniel, ever composed, stood up and extended a hand. "Nathan Cole, I was just telling your wife how remarkable her insights are." Nathan didn't shake the hand. "I'm sure you were." Mia felt the heat rise under her skin. "Nathan," he turned to her, eyes sharp, "you didn't answer my message." "I didn't think I owed you an itinerary," she said, meeting his gaze. Daniel cleared his throat. "Perhaps I should give you two a moment." "No," Nathan said quickly. "Stay. You were in the middle of making her an offer, weren't you?" Daniel's brows lifted slightly. "Yes. A consulting position. She's overqualified to sit at home." The statement landed like a challenge. Nathan's jaw tightened. Mia doesn't work. She doesn't need to. She doesn't need to, or you don't need her to, Daniel asked calmly. For the first time, the controlled executive facade cracked. Nathan's eyes flashed, his voice lower now. You think you know her after one dinner? Daniel's smile didn't fade. I know potential when I see it. I also know when someone is undervalued. Mia's hand trembled slightly on her napkin. Stop. Both men looked at her. This isn't a competition, she said quietly. It's dinner, and I'll decide for myself what I do next. Nathan turned toward her, disbelief flickering across his face. You'd consider working for him? I'd consider working, she said, emphasizing the word, because I miss using my mind for something other than keeping up appearances. The waiter, sensing the atmosphere, slid away silently. Nathan exhaled hard, running a hand through his hair. Mia, this isn't the place. No, this is exactly the place, she replied, her voice low but steady. Because for once, I'm being seen. Daniel looked between them, something like sympathy in his expression. He understood, maybe more than he'd let on, that he had walked into a marriage cracking open under its own silence. He said gently, Mia, my offer stands. Think about it. Take your time. Then to Nathan, you're a lucky man if you know how to see her. Nathan's jaw clenched. I'm starting to. Daniel nodded once, then excused himself, leaving the two of them in a silence far heavier than the one that used to fill their home. Mia didn't move. The candle between them burned low, a thin thread of smoke curling upward. Nathan sat down across from her. I shouldn't have come, he admitted quietly. No, she said. You shouldn't have. He looked at her hands, resting on the table. I was worried. Worried or angry? Both. She gave a humorless laugh. I didn't know you could feel both about me. Nathan leaned forward, lowering his voice. You don't understand what it's like, seeing you with someone else. No, she said. You don't understand what it's like to live with someone who sees through you. The rain outside tapped softly against the window. They sat in the flickering light, neither willing to leave first. Nathan finally said, almost to himself, he's right about one thing. What's that? You are remarkable. The confession landed between them, quiet but undeniable. Mia stared at him for a moment, searching for the man she used to imagine he could be, and for the first time, she saw him. Not the CEO, not the stranger she'd shared a house with, but a man realizing too late that love doesn't wait for convenience. I'll take the job if I want it, she said. He nodded slowly, defeated but not dismissive. Then at least let me drive you home. She stood, wrapping her coat around her shoulders. No, Nathan. Tonight I'll take a cab. I think I need the ride to remember who I am. He didn't stop. Her. He just watched as she walked out into the drizzle, her figure framed by the restaurant's golden light before disappearing into the gray night. When the door closed, Nathan sat back in his chair, staring at the candle still burning on the table. Its flame swayed gently, stubborn, fragile, alive. He realized he'd been living with something just like it for years, and only now did he notice how close he had come to letting it go out. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, leaving the city washed and quiet. Streetlights still glowed against the pale fog that rolled in from the bay, and inside the car, only the wipers spoke. Mia sat in the passenger seat, arms folded, her reflection layered over the glass. Nathan's hands gripped the wheel, knuckles pale, every second of silence heavier than the one before it. She was the first to break it. You don't get to be jealous, Nathan. He glanced at her, then back at the road. I wasn't. You were, she interrupted calmly. And you don't have the right. You don't get to ignore someone for 3 years and then suddenly care who they have dinner with. Nathan exhaled through his nose, jaw tightening. You make it sound simple. It is, she said, her tone steady. You chose not to see me. Don't start now because someone else finally did. The words struck with surgical precision. Nathan didn't argue. He drove the rest of the way in silence, headlights carving brief paths through the wet streets. When they reached the house, Mia got out before he could circle around to open the door. She didn't slam it. She didn't need to. The quiet was sharper than any sound could be. Nathan watched her disappear into the dark hallway, her figure swallowed by the house they shared, but never lived in. That night, sleep refused him. He sat in his study, the clock ticking too loudly, surrounded by the trophies of success that suddenly felt hollow. On the shelf above his desk sat a photo album, one he'd never opened, their wedding photos. He picked it up, flipping through the glossy pages. There she was, smiling in every picture, eyes sparkling under the veil. He'd never noticed before that her smile didn't quite reach those eyes. There was light, but it wasn't peace. It was resignation disguised as grace. He felt something heavy press against his chest. Guilt, maybe, or fear. Fear that she had already decided to leave, and he was the last to know. For years, he had mastered control of markets, of negotiations, of people. But the thought of losing Mia to something as simple as kindness from another man, that was chaos he didn't know how to manage. The sky began to pale before he realized he'd been awake all night. In the stillness of dawn, a decision took shape, small but strange enough to scare him. He went to the kitchen. For 3 years, that room had belonged to everyone but him, the chef, the housekeeper, the silent routine of breakfast trays delivered to separate tables. This morning, he wanted it to belong to them. He rolled up his sleeves, opened the refrigerator, and stared at the unfamiliar territory of ingredients. Eggs, bread, butter. It couldn't be that hard. 20 minutes later, the counters were a battlefield. Flour on the marble, cracked eggshells on the floor, smoke rising from the pan like a distress signal. But he was trying, truly trying. He burned. 2 pieces of toast before the third came out golden. The scrambled eggs were uneven, the coffee too strong, but it was the most honest thing he'd made in years. Upstairs, Mia woke to the faint sound of metal clinking and something sizzling. Her first thought was confusion. The staff didn't start this early. When she walked downstairs, she stopped at the doorway. The scene before her almost absurd. Nathan Cole, the man whose schedule ran like clockwork and whose kitchen shoes had probably never touched the tile, was standing at the stove wearing a dark gray t-shirt and an apron dusted with flour. He was focused, one hand awkwardly flipping an egg that promptly tore apart. Mia blinked. "What on earth are you doing?" Nathan looked over his shoulder, caught like a child sneaking cookies. "Making breakfast." "For who?" "For us." She leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms, eyes narrowing. "You? Cooking?" He smiled faintly. "Don't look so alarmed. I watched a tutorial at 5 a.m. Mia tried not to laugh, but a small sound escaped anyway, the kind that hadn't been heard in that kitchen for too long. Nathan placed 2 imperfect plates on the island and gestured toward the chair. "Sit, please." She hesitated, but the sight of him wiping his hands on a towel, nervously pretending confidence, disarmed her in ways she didn't expect. "Fine," she said, sliding onto the stool. He poured coffee into 2 cups, one with too much steam, the other barely hot. When he sat across from her, the space felt smaller, warmer. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then Nathan asked softly, "Did you sleep well?" Mia blinked. "What?" "I said, did you sleep well?" It was such an ordinary question, but from him, it sounded like a revelation. She nodded slowly. "I did. You?" He shook his head. "Not really." "You should," she said. "You'll burn out." "I already did," he said quietly. Something in his voice made her look up. For once there was no armor in it, no distance, no authority, just honesty. Nathan picked at the crust of his toast, then asked, "Do you like Seattle?" She frowned, surprised again. "I guess so. Why?" "I was wondering," he said carefully, "if you'd rather move somewhere else, somewhere with more light, or less rain." Mia tilted her head. "You hate the rain." "I hate what it reminds me of," he said. "Loneliness." Her breath caught slightly. "That's ironic." He nodded. "I know." They both fell silent again, but this time it wasn't the cold, empty kind. It was the silence of 2 people learning how to listen, after years of noise that never said anything real. When she finished her meal, surprisingly edible, Mia set her fork down. "Why are you doing this?" He met her eyes. "Because last night, I realized something." "What's that?" "I've been living like a widower in a marriage that's still alive." Mia studied him, searching for sarcasm, for performance. There was none. "Cooking breakfast won't fix 3 years," she said gently. "I know," he said, "but it's a start." She sighed, looking down at the plate. "It's terrible, by the way." He smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that." When she stood to leave, he caught himself wanting to ask her to stay, not because of the food, but because of the way the morning light caught the edge of her smile. But he didn't. He just watched her walk toward the window, her coffee cup steaming between her hands. Outside, the sun had broken through the gray for the first time in days. It cast soft light over the messy kitchen, over burnt toast, over cold coffee, over two people finally daring to exist in the same morning. Nathan leaned against the counter, following her gaze. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether she'd forgive him, whether she'd take that job, whether they had a chance left at all. But for the first time in 3 years, he wanted to learn, not how to run a company, but how to be someone's husband. It began with something small, the sound of a door closing earlier than usual. Nathan came home before sunset. The first time it happened, Mia thought it was an accident. The second time, a coincidence. By the third, she realized it was deliberate. For the first time in years, the CEO of Cole Logistics was no longer chained to the 22nd floor of his glass tower. He came home for lunch. He walked with her by the lake behind their neighborhood. He asked questions, real ones. Tuesday afternoon, they strolled along the narrow trail circling Lake Washington. Leaves, copper and gold, fell in spirals between them. Mia carried a paper cup of coffee. Nathan held nothing, his hands tucked in the pockets of his coat, like a man who had run out of excuses to be busy. He was the one who spoke first. "I met with the regional team this morning." She replied, eyes on the water. "Should I congratulate them or brace for bad news?" A small smile curved his mouth. "Good news, actually. We're opening a Latin American branch next quarter. I want you to be part of it." She turned to him, eyebrows raised. "You're offering me a job now?" "I'm offering you a partnership," he said. "As a consultant. You know the market better than anyone I could hire." Mia's laugh came soft, almost disbelieving. "You mean you want your wife to work for your company?" "No," Nathan said, slowing his pace so he could face her fully. "I want Mia Reyes, the woman who used to close deals in Spanish and negotiate across continents, to work with me." The difference in one word, with, landed deeper than she expected. Mia looked at him carefully. "And you're sure this isn't just guilt talking, or a phase of repentance before you go back to being you?" He shook his head. "I can't promise I'll be perfect, but I can promise I'm done pretending you're invisible. Guilt didn't make me come home early. Wanting to know you did." For a moment, she didn't answer. The breeze moved between them, scattering the scent of wet leaves and rain. Finally, she said quietly, "I need more than words, Nathan." He nodded. "I know, so do I." The next few days unfolded like scenes from someone else's life. Nathan rescheduled his calendar, delegating meetings that had once felt non-negotiable. He returned home in the afternoons, loosening his tie before even stepping out of the car. Sometimes he'd find Mia reading in the living room, or sketching plans for the consulting work she'd been offered by Daniel's firm. He never interrupted. He'd sit across from her, laptop open but barely touched, simply existing in the same space. One afternoon, while she scribbled notes, he asked, "Do you ever miss it? The travel, the deadlines, the chaos?" Mia smiled faintly. "Every day, but not the loneliness. That part, I've had enough of." He looked down, shame shadowing his face. "I gave you plenty of that." "You did," she said softly, "but you're not the only one learning now." He met her gaze. "What are you learning?" "That forgiveness takes time, and patience takes strength." The conversation lingered in the air, warm like late sunlight. On Thursday, they walked again by the lake. The same path, now brighter with the soft gold of mid-autumn. Mia told him stories about her years in South America. The long nights in airports, the deals that fell apart, the laughter over street food with clients who became friends. He listened, really listened, asking about places he'd only seen on spreadsheets. "And you?" she asked after a while. "What was it like for you, growing up in your world?" Nathan hesitated, his breath visible in the cold. "Structured," he said finally. "Structured? My father had a rule for everything. When to wake, when to study, when to speak, even when to smile, and who it should be for." Mia slowed her steps. "That sounds lonely." "It was," he admitted. "He built me like a prototype, a successor, not a son. I think I learned to measure worth the way he did, by output, not by feeling. You were the first person who didn't fit that math." She looked at him then, a flicker of empathy softening her guard. "And that scared you." "Still does," he confessed. "But I'm trying to unlearn it." They stopped at the curve where the path opened to the lake. The water was still, a perfect mirror of the sky. Nathan turned slightly toward her. "I'm not the man I was a week ago." "I believe that," she said, "but I'm not the woman I was either." He studied her profile. The calm strength, the quiet intelligence in her eyes. It wasn't the kind of beauty that screamed for attention. It was the kind that made silence feel full. "Then maybe we start over," he said. Mia smiled, but there was caution in it. "I'm not ready to start over, not yet." Nathan nodded. "Then I'll wait. Just let me walk beside you until you are." That evening, back at the house, he cooked dinner again. Pasta this time, slightly overcooked, but edible. They ate together at the kitchen island, no background music, no forced conversation. Afterward, they lingered, talking about everything and nothing. Favorite movies, foods they'd loved before wealth made them complicated, the smell of rain in different cities. When she laughed, he realized it was the first real sound of happiness he'd heard in that kitchen. "Don't look so surprised," she teased. "I just didn't know I missed that sound until now," he replied. Mia looked at him for a long moment, then said quietly, "You're changing, Nathan. I see it." He smiled. "That's all I needed to hear." She set down her glass. "But don't think that means I'm ready to fall in love again." "I wouldn't ask you to," he said gently. "I'd rather earn it." Later that night, when she went upstairs, Nathan stayed behind, clearing the dishes himself. He looked out through the window at the lake, its surface glimmering under the streetlights. For the first time in years, the silence in the house didn't feel empty. It felt alive, waiting. Upstairs, Mia lay in bed, replaying the day. Every gesture, every question, every laugh felt like small cracks forming in the wall she'd built around her heart. But she didn't want to be careless with hope. She'd been here before, believing in promises that time had eroded. So she whispered into the dark, not as a prayer, but as a quiet truth to herself. "Let him keep this up. Let it last." And somewhere downstairs, Nathan whispered to the same empty air, "I won't stop this time." Two voices, in two rooms, finally speaking the same language, just not yet to each other. A week passed like a soft breath. The house had learned to hum again. Footsteps in the morning, shared laughter at breakfast, the occasional teasing that felt more like old friends than spouses. Mia had started to look forward to the sound of keys in the door, the quiet way Nathan said her name as if afraid to break the moment. But comfort is fragile, and sometimes all it takes is one phone call to remind you how temporary peace can be. That Thursday morning, Mia's phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number. When she answered, the voice was warm, steady, unmistakable. "Daniel Ward." She froze for a heartbeat. "Daniel, it's been a while." "Not too long," he said with a smile she could almost hear. "I was wondering if you had time to meet today. I'd like to close the loop on that job offer, whether it's a yes, no, or maybe." Mia hesitated, her fingers tracing the edge of her coffee mug. "You're in town?" "Just for the day. Lunch at Fiora's, neutral ground, good food, terrible chairs." A small laugh escaped her. "You never change." "I try not to," Daniel replied, "but people do, especially the ones worth noticing." The silence stretched just long enough to carry meaning. Finally, she said, "All right, lunch it is." When the call ended, she sat for a moment, the phone still in her hand. It wasn't excitement she felt. It was something closer to confusion. Because when she thought of seeing Daniel, her first instinct wasn't about the job. It was about how Nathan would react. And that realization startled her more than the invitation itself. She stood before the mirror longer than she meant to. After years of dressing to please expectations, it felt strange to choose something for herself. She picked a soft yellow dress, bright, simple, alive. When she came downstairs, the scent of espresso filled the kitchen. Nathan was at the counter, sleeves rolled up, reading something on his tablet. He looked up when he heard her heels. "Morning," he said. "You look..." He stopped, searching for the right word. "Different. Good different. Dangerously good," he said before he could catch himself. She smiled lightly, fastening her earrings. "I have a meeting." "With who?" She hesitated. "Daniel." The pause that followed was short, but sharp. Nathan set the tablet down slowly. "The same Daniel Ward?" "Yes, I need to give him my final answer." "And what answer is that?" "I don't know yet." He nodded, but his jaw tightened, the line of tension traveling from his temple to his collar. When she reached for her bag, his voice followed her. "Be careful." Mia turned back, meeting his gaze. Of what? Of him, Nathan said quietly, and of me. From his office downtown, Nathan tried to work. He really did. But focus slipped through him like water through cupped hands. He told himself it was business. He had always been a man of control, and losing track of something, even his wife's lunch plans, unsettled him. But beneath the logic was something deeper, fear. At 12:15, he stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, eyes on the street below, and then he saw it, the silver car pulling up to the front entrance of their building. Daniel stepped out first, polished as ever. Then Mia, her yellow dress bright against the gray of the city. Nathan's pulse kicked hard. He told himself not to move, not to care. He failed. The restaurant was full but calm, lunchtime chatter blending into a low hum. Daniel stood when she arrived, pulling out her chair like an old-fashioned gentleman. "You still believe in manners?" she said with a small smile. "Always," he replied, "especially with people who deserve them." They ordered light, salad, pasta, sparkling water, the kind of meal made for conversation, not hunger. "So," he said after the waiter left, "what's your answer?" Mia looked at him, thoughtful. "Honestly, I don't know. Things changed." Daniel nodded. "I guessed as much. You sound softer over the phone. Happier, maybe." She tilted her head. "You can tell that from a voice?" He smiled. "I've made a career out of reading tone, and I can tell you this. Nathan Cole has changed too." Her surprise flickered across her face. "You've seen him?" "Not recently," Daniel said, "but the man who stormed into that restaurant wasn't capable of what I just saw when you walked in. He looked at you like someone trying to remember how to breathe." Mia's lips parted, but no words came. Daniel leaned back, his tone softening. "You still love him, don't you?" She hesitated, fingers tightening around her napkin. "Love isn't the problem. Trust is." "That's fair," he said. "Just promise me something. Don't stay out of habit. Stay because he sees you, not because he finally noticed what someone else saw first." She exhaled slowly. "You always know where to hit, Daniel." "Old habit," he smiled gently. "And for what it's worth, if you ever decide you're ready to work again, my door stays open. I believe in you, Mia, with or without him." Her eyes softened. "Thank you." He reached across the table, briefly touching her wrist, a gesture of reassurance, nothing more, but it was enough to make time slow. And from across the room, another pair of eyes saw it. Nathan had arrived minutes earlier. He stood near the bar, half hidden by a column, his body caught between impulse and restraint. He'd told himself he was only here to apologize for overreacting, to prove he could handle her independence with grace. But when he saw Daniel's hand brush her skin, something primal broke through the reason. He didn't move toward them immediately. He just watched, his heart pounding, his fists curling slightly at his sides. It wasn't rage, it was fear. Sharp, clean, undeniable fear. Mia looked up then, sensing the weight of a gaze that had learned her shape too well. Their eyes met across the restaurant, her calm, his burning. Daniel noticed the shift in her expression and turned slightly. "Ah," he murmured, "the storm arrives." Nathan approached, controlled but coiled, his voice measured. "I thought I'd find you here." Mia straightened in her seat. "Are you following me now?" "I came to bring you your umbrella," he said quietly, placing it on the table. "It's raining again." Daniel smiled faintly. "That's thoughtful of you." Nathan ignored him, his eyes fixed on Mia. "We should go." She didn't move. "Nathan," he leaned closer, voice low, "please." The single word wasn't an order this time. It was a request. Daniel cleared his throat. "Mia, whatever choice you make sure it's yours, not his, not mine." She nodded, her pulse unsteady. "I know." Nathan exhaled slowly, stepping back. "You're right, Mr. Ward. She deserves a choice. I just hope she realizes she's the only one I'd ever choose." Then he turned and walked toward the door. For a moment, Mia stayed seated, the world around her blurring into soft noise. Daniel looked at her kindly. "He's not the man you married, is he?" "No," she said, standing slowly, "and I'm still deciding if that's a good thing." She left the restaurant, the bell over the door chiming softly behind her. Outside, Nathan waited by the curb, rain gathering on his shoulders. When she reached him, he didn't speak. He just held out the umbrella. Mia took it, their fingers brushing. a quiet spark in the drizzle. For once, he didn't try to explain or control the silence between them. He simply walked beside her through the rain, hoping it was enough to keep her from walking away altogether. The rain hadn't stopped since they left the restaurant. It fell in soft, relentless sheets, washing the color from everything except the raw heat still burning between them. Mia walked ahead, heels striking the pavement. Nathan followed, a few steps behind, silent, jaw locked. When they reached the parking lot, she spun around, her hair damp, her voice sharp. "Why do you keep following me, Nathan? Do you think showing up everywhere I go will make me love you?" He stopped, hands clenched at his sides. "That's not why I came." "Then what? To make sure I didn't embarrass you again? To remind me that I'm still part of your image?" His voice rose, breaking past restraint. "Because I can't stand seeing him touch you." The rain hissed around them like static. Mia stared at him, stunned. "You can't stand it? After 3 years of not even looking at me, suddenly you care who stands next to me?" "I've always cared," he said, stepping closer. "I just didn't know what to do with it." She laughed bitterly. "That's not love, Nathan. That's control." "No," he said, voice rough. "It's fear. The kind I didn't recognize until now. Daniel walked in and, God, I hated it. Because it made me realize something I've been too coward to admit." Mia's chest tightened, but she didn't interrupt. He took another step forward. "I love you." The words hit like thunder, too sudden, too bright. Mia's lips parted, but no sound came out. Nathan went on, quieter now. "I don't know when it happened. Maybe somewhere between watching you disappear from every room and realizing the silence wasn't peace, it was punishment. Maybe it was last week when you laughed in the kitchen. Maybe it was tonight, when I realized the thought of losing you hurt more than the truth ever could." Mia shook her head slowly. "You can't say that just because you're jealous. I'm saying it because it's the only thing that still feels real." Her voice trembled, the anger softening into something fragile. "Then prove it, Nathan. Not with words, not with control, with honesty." He nodded once. "Then tonight, no more lies." Hours later, the house was quiet except for the rain tapping against the windows. Mia sat at her vanity, combing her hair absently. The reflection staring back at her looked tired, conflicted, alive. There was a knock on the door. She turned. "It's late." "I know." Nathan's voice was low. "But if I wait till morning, I'll lose my nerve." He stood at the doorway, no suit, no armor, just him. "Mia, can we talk?" After a long pause, she nodded. "Come in." He stepped inside, stopping it a few feet away. "I owe you the truth," he said quietly. "All of it." Mia folded her hands in her lap. "Then start there." Nathan exhaled, steadying himself. "My father taught me that love was leverage. He used my mother's affection like a currency. Spend it, trade it, threaten it. By the time I was 10, I thought that's what marriage was, a deal." He met her eyes. "So when my board told me I needed stability, an image, a family, I didn't think of it as cruel. I thought it was efficient. You were smart, beautiful, calm. You didn't ask for much. I thought we'd fit." "Fit," she repeated softly. "Like a merger." "Yes." His throat tightened. "But I didn't see what I was doing to you. I didn't see you stop shining, and I didn't care enough to ask why." She stayed silent for a moment, then said, "You think being broken makes you crueler, but it just makes you scared. You turned our marriage into a cage because it's all you've ever known." Nathan nodded. "And you've been the only one brave enough to tell me that." She looked away, voice trembling. "Do you know what it felt like? The night I found out about the deal between our families?" He shook his head. "I was sitting in my father's office," she said. "He told me the company would collapse unless I agreed to marry you. He said it like it was math, like my life was an equation to balance. I said yes because I thought maybe you'd be kind." Nathan's face twisted in pain. "But when we met," she continued, "you looked at me like an acquisition. That dinner, your questions were all about how adaptable I was, how much travel I could handle, how I dealt with pressure. It felt less like a proposal and more like a job interview." He took a slow breath. "I remember. I thought I was being practical. I tried to love you, she said softly. "I cooked, I waited, I smiled, and you treated me like air. Do you know how humiliating it is to live with someone who makes you feel invisible?" "I do now," he whispered, "because that's what you're doing to me." The honesty in his voice cracked something open inside her. For the first time, he wasn't defending himself. He was confessing. She looked at him, this man who had built empires but never learned how to hold a heart. And for the first time, she saw not power, but vulnerability. Mia's voice softened. "Why now, Nathan? Why not 3 years ago?" "Because I wasn't ready to lose you then," he said. "Now I know I already did, and I'm trying to find you again." Silence stretched between them, charged and trembling. He took one hesitant step closer. "If you tell me to leave, I will." She didn't. He sat down beside her on the edge of the bed, leaving a respectful space between them. The air was thick with all the words they hadn't said. Mia spoke first. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if we met differently? Without contracts? Without debts?" "Every day," he said. "Maybe I would have known how lucky I was sooner." Their eyes met, the distance shrinking until the room felt smaller than breath. Then, slowly, Nathan reached out, not with demand, but with question. His hand brushed hers, waiting. Mia didn't pull away. The touch was simple, human, trembling with everything unspoken. When she finally looked up, the tears in her eyes weren't anger anymore. "Nathan," she whispered, "don't promise to be perfect. Just promise to be real." He nodded, voice breaking. "I swear it." And then, at last, he kissed her. It wasn't urgent or claiming. It was tentative, reverent, like a man discovering something sacred. Her fingers tightened against his shirt, and the dam between them broke. They didn't rush. They didn't need to. For the first time, it wasn't about obligation or appearances. It was about two people who had spent 3 years side by side, finally finding each other in the same place. When they finally pulled apart, the world outside had gone still. Rain whispered against the window, steady and forgiving. Nathan looked into her eyes, his voice raw. "Tell me if I'm wrong." "You're not," she said, her voice barely a breath. "You're just late." And when she reached for him, the space between them disappeared. That night, they became what their wedding vows had promised, but never delivered. Two souls, finally unafraid of being seen. For the first time in 3 years, the house didn't feel like a museum. The mornings weren't silent, they were slow and golden. 2 mugs, 1 newspaper, quiet laughter that replaced the sound of separate breakfasts. Nathan learned to make omelets without burning them. Mia learned that he hummed, softly and unconsciously, while pouring coffee. They met in the kitchen now, not out of routine, but because they wanted to. The transformation was subtle but steady, like spring thawing winter. They spent Saturdays at Pike Place Market, weaving through crowds, Nathan pretending not to be recognized while she picked flowers or tasted jam from local stalls. When she teased him about being a millionaire who still haggled over blueberries, he only smiled. Some things are worth bargaining for. By the 3rd week, he began taking her to corners of Seattle she'd never seen. The harbor at dawn, the old lighthouse near Discovery Park, a tiny cafe that roasted beans by hand. Everywhere they went, Nathan introduced her the same way. "This is Mia," he'd say, his hand lightly at her back. "My partner." No titles, no CEO, no Mrs. Cole, just partner. And it meant more to her than any ring ever had. When the South American expansion finally reached the planning stage, Nathan asked her to attend the internal briefing. His executives, used to seeing her as a quiet shadow in the background, were startled when he opened the meeting by saying, "Mia will be advising us on this project. Her background in emerging markets speaks for itself." The room fell into a stunned silence before the polite applause began. Mia smiled, small, controlled, but inside, something long dormant flickered awake. That night, she admitted to him, it felt strange, being taken seriously again. He leaned closer, eyes soft. "It shouldn't feel strange. It should feel normal." "And you?" she asked. "How did it feel introducing me that way?" Nathan smiled faintly, like I finally got something right. Her professional spark reignited quickly. Within weeks, Mia took on small consulting projects, short contracts with independent clients. She'd work in the sunroom, laptop open, charts and notes spread around her like petals. Nathan often paused in the doorway to watch her, not to interrupt, just to remember this version of her, focused, confident, alive. When a junior executive mentioned her report at a board meeting, Nathan smiled and said proudly, "She's brilliant. You'd be lucky to get 10 minutes of her time." It wasn't for show, it was reverence. And when Mia heard about it later, she couldn't help but laugh. "You've become my PR manager." "I'll take that title," he replied. "It's my favorite job so far." Their marriage, once hollow, was filling with small things. Shared glances, late-night talks, the quiet intimacy of trust rebuilt. Even the physical distance that had once been a wall dissolved into something natural. A hand on a shoulder, a kiss before work. The easy rhythm of two people learning each other again. One Sunday evening, the sun dipped low over Puget Sound, spilling molten gold across the porch of their house on the hill. They sat side by side on the wooden bench Nathan had built during one of his rare weekends off years ago. The air smelled of rain and pine. Mia held a cup of green tea, her knees drawn close. Nathan sat beside her, sleeves rolled up, barefoot, looking more like a man than a mogul. For a while, they said nothing. Then she broke the silence. "Nathan," she said softly, "can I ask you something?" He turned toward her. "Anything. If one day, the company and I stood on opposite sides, if my work ever clashed with coal logistics, what would you choose?" He didn't hesitate. "You." Mia's eyes flicked toward him, searching for truth. "So easily?" "There's no calculation," he said. "You're not part of the business, Mia. You're the reason it means something." Her lips curved, touched by his certainty, but deep inside, she saw something flicker behind his calm, a brief shadow, almost imperceptible. Maybe she imagined it. Maybe she wanted too much clarity. Still, she smiled and leaned her head lightly against his shoulder. "That's the first time I've believed you." Nathan kissed the top of her hair, the motion instinctive, tender. "Then I'll keep earning that belief." They stayed like that until the sun sank completely, wrapped in a quiet that felt like peace. Days blurred into a soft rhythm of work and love. Mia's faith in him grew stronger, in the way he looked at her across a crowded room, in how he listened when she spoke, in how he no longer used silence as a weapon. Nathan, for his part, carried a lightness he'd never known. He stopped flinching at vulnerability. He smiled more. He slept better. But, under the surface, a single truth waited like a crack beneath glass, one he'd never had the courage to confront. The truth about the deal that had once bound them together. He told himself it didn't matter anymore, that what they had now erased what it began as. But lies, even buried in love, have gravity, and that gravity was about to find its way to the surface. It happened on an ordinary afternoon. Nathan was away at the office. Mia, taking a break from her reports, decided to tidy his study, a room he hadn't used much lately. The desk was cluttered with blueprints, notes, old coffee cups, and papers from the Latin project. She smiled, shaking her head. "So, this is what organized chaos looks like," she murmured. When she bent down to pick up a folder that had slipped behind the desk, a flash of paper caught her eye. It wasn't part of the new files. The edges were yellowed slightly, the print older. Curious, she pulled it free. A slim black folder marked Confidential, Merger Agreement, Peterson Accounting, Cole Holdings. Her hands stilled. The room went quiet except for the sound of her own heartbeat. She flipped it open. Inside were signatures, hers, Nathan's, and two she knew too well, her parents'. The first line read, "This marriage shall ensure the consolidation of assets between Cole Holdings and Peterson Accounting." Her chest tightened, words blurred, paragraphs bleeding together as her eyes raced down the page. Clauses about financial obligations, time frames, marital duration for stability, even provisions about heirs. Every line screamed the same truth. Their marriage hadn't just saved her family. It had been written, bargained, bought. Mia sank into Nathan's chair, the folder open in her trembling hands. Outside, the city lights began to flicker on, one by one, like distant witnesses to a truth she wasn't ready to face. The tea they'd shared on the porch just hours ago still sat warm on the counter, but the peace between them had already begun to cool. The folder lay open on the desk like a wound that refused to close. Mia sat motionless for a long time, eyes locked on the signatures, hers, Nathan's, and her parents', binding them together in black ink and betrayal. The words blurred, but the meaning was clear. Marriage shall serve as the key condition for the merger between Reyes Financial and Cole Holdings. Terms followed like shackles: minimum duration, 5 years, public image of a stable union, succession planning for heirs within contract period. It wasn't a marriage contract. It was a business acquisition written in the language of affection. Mia's breath trembled. The paper in her hands might as well have been burning. She'd thought she had escaped that feeling, the day her father told her she was the only collateral left to save their firm. But this time, it wasn't desperation that sold her. It was love that betrayed her. She stood up slowly, clutching the folder to her chest. The golden light from the windows turned cold. By the time Nathan came home, the house no longer felt like a home. "Mia?" His voice echoed down the hallway. "I brought dinner. Your favorite." He stopped short when he reached the study. She was standing by the window, the city burning silver behind her, a stack of papers in her hands. "Mia," he said again, softly this time, like a man approaching a ledge. "What's that?" She turned around, eyes unreadable. "You tell me." He frowned, confused, until he saw the black folder. Color drained from his face. "Mia, wait." She opened the first page, her voice calm, deliberate. Clause 4B. The marriage between Nathan Cole and Mia Reyes will ensure the acquisition and full integration of Reyes financial assets. "Mia, please." Clause 5C, she continued, cutting through his words. The couple will maintain the appearance of a stable family for a minimum of 5 years to protect investor confidence. Nathan stepped closer. "It's not what it looks like." Her tone didn't change. Clause 6A. A family succession plan will be announced within 3 years to reinforce the long-term stability of the merger. You even had a timeline for children, Nathan. Did you draft the schedule for their birthdays too? His throat tightened. "Stop." "Why?" she said quietly. "It's the only time you ever cared about numbers." He ran a hand through his hair, pacing, breath unsteady. "Mia, listen to me. When this started, I didn't think of it as a trick. Your parents came to us desperate. My father made the offer. It was supposed to save everyone. I thought—" He stopped, struggling for words. "I thought we were helping each other." Her eyes glistened, but her voice stayed cold. "Helping? You mean buying?" "It wasn't like that." "It was exactly like that," she said, voice breaking now. "You bought my silence. You bought my name. You bought the right to ignore me for 3 years and call it business." Nathan reached for her, but she stepped back. "Please, don't." He froze, hands falling helplessly to his sides. "I never wanted you to find out this way," he said. "I was going to tell you." "When?" she snapped. "After 5 years? After the press release about our perfect family?" Nathan's voice cracked. "Mia, I didn't know what love was back then. Everything I've done since, breakfasts, the trips, introducing you as my partner, that was real. But the foundation wasn't." Her voice softened, the anger fading into something worse, disappointment. "It's like building a house on a lie, Nathan. No matter how beautiful the walls, the floor still sinks." He took a step closer, desperate. "Tell me what I can do." "Undo it," she said simply. "End the merger. Give Reyes Financial back to my family. Prove that I matter more than money." The silence that followed was unbearable. Nathan's lips parted, but no words came. Mia waited, watching his face. The flicker of fear, the calculation, the hesitation that betrayed everything he wanted her to believe. That heartbeat of silence was her answer. When she spoke again, her voice was steady, too steady. "I thought the worst thing was being invisible to you. I was wrong. The worst thing is realizing I was never seen at all." Nathan reached out. "Mia, please." She shook her head. "Don't." She placed the folder back on his desk, smoothing it with trembling fingers, as if returning something that no longer belonged to her. "Do you remember what you said on the porch?" she whispered. "If it's between you and the company, I'll choose you." Her eyes met his. "You just didn't think I'd ever ask you to prove it." He swallowed hard, guilt and panic warring behind his eyes. "It's not that simple." "It is," she said, a faint sad smile curving her lips. "But you've always been better with complicated." Nathan took another step toward her, his voice breaking. "Don't leave. Don't do this. We can fix it. We can—" "You can't fix what you never meant to break," she said gently. "You can only start over, and I need to start somewhere else." The next hour unfolded in silence. Mia packed only what she could carry: a few clothes, her laptop, a worn notebook full of sketches and old dreams. Every drawer she closed echoed like an ending. Downstairs, Nathan stood by the grand staircase, the weight of 3 years pressing down like gravity. When she appeared at the landing, suitcase in hand, he moved toward her. "Mia." She paused on the last step, the dim chandelier light glinting in her hair. "Tell me this isn't forever," he whispered. "I don't know what forever is anymore," she said, "but right now, it's not here." He nodded slowly, the fight leaving his body. "I love you." Mia's eyes softened, but her voice stayed calm. "I wish that had been true when it mattered most." She turned and walked toward the door, her suitcase wheels whispering over the marble floor. Nathan followed to the threshold, unable to cross it. The glass walls around him reflected her small figure, her silhouette shrinking with each step across the long, echoing foyer. When the door closed behind her, the house fell into silence. A silence Nathan finally understood wasn't peace at all. It was loss. And for the first time in his life, the man who measured everything in numbers couldn't calculate the cost of what he'd just lost. For 7 days, the world outside went on as usual. But for Mia, time stopped. The hotel room became her whole existence. White sheets, untouched meals, muted city noise leaking through the curtains. Every morning, she promised herself she'd stop crying. Every night, she broke that promise. She ignored every message, every call. Nathan's name kept lighting up her phone until she turned it face down and let it buzz into silence. By the end of the week, she barely recognized herself. Not in the mirror, not in her reflection, not even in her own heart. Meanwhile, across the city, Nathan was unraveling. He hadn't eaten in days. Sleep came in bursts. 5 minutes here, 10 there, broken by flashes of her walking away. The house, once full of her laughter, now echoed like a cathedral after the choir had gone home. At first, he wrote letters, long, rambling ones full of apologies he never sent. Then he realized something. Words were just another kind of currency, and he'd already spent too many. If he wanted to win her back, he couldn't say she mattered more than the company. He had to prove it. On Monday morning, Nathan walked into the Cole Holdings boardroom, a glass cage hovering over downtown Seattle. The room was filled with power. His father, Robert Cole, 2 senior partners, the company's legal team. "Gentlemen," Nathan began, voice steady despite the weight pressing on his chest. "I've called this emergency session to discuss the Reyes merger." His father frowned. "The merger's already secured. What's there to discuss?" Nathan set a folder on the table. "I want it undone." The words hit like a dropped glass. "What?" Robert said sharply. "That's a $40 million contract, Nathan." "I know." Robert stood up. "You're out of your mind. The market will destroy you if you—" Nathan cut him off. "Then let it." The room went silent. He looked at the lawyers. "I want the full transfer of Reyes Financial back to David and Elena Reyes, effective immediately. They keep all prepaid assets and capital as moral compensation." One of the lawyers hesitated. "Mr. Cole, that would cost us millions," Robert snapped. "You're going to burn everything your grandfather built for a woman?" Nathan met his father's eyes. "No, I'm saving what he forgot. Integrity." Robert's face turned crimson. "Don't give me speeches about integrity. You think throwing money at guilt will make you noble? You'll ruin your career, your reputation." "Then I'll build a new one," Nathan said quietly. "One I can look at in the mirror." The older man's voice cracked with disbelief. "All this? For her?" "For me," Nathan replied. "Because for once I want to be the man she thought I could be." The lawyers shuffled papers, whispering about logistics and legal exposure. Nathan tuned them out. He picked up the pen, feeling its weight like a verdict. "This is madness," his father muttered. "No," Nathan said, "this is clarity." And with one steady motion, he signed the documents, transferring millions of dollars and an entire company back to the woman whose love had been traded for it. The ink dried, sealing his choice. For the first time in years, he felt free. Later that afternoon, Nathan drove out of the city. The Reyes family home sat on the quiet edge of Bellevue, modest, warm, alive in the way his own mansion never was. Elena opened the door, startled to see him. "Nathan, may I come in?" he asked. David Reyes looked up from the kitchen table when Nathan entered. The older man's face carried both suspicion and guilt. "I came to tell you," Nathan began, "the merger's undone. The company's yours again, completely." David stared at him, stunned. What are you talking about? I canceled the deal. You'll receive legal notice this evening. You can keep the advance funds as compensation. Consider it what should have been yours all along." Elena's eyes filled with tears. "You did that for Mia?" "For the truth," Nathan said quietly. "She deserved one." David leaned back, shaking his head. "You must really love her." "I do," Nathan said simply. "Enough to start over without a single cent if that's what it takes." Elena touched his arm gently. "She'll know, Nathan. Sooner or later, she'll know." He nodded, though doubt still shadowed his face. "I hope I haven't already run out of later." Across town, Mia woke to another gray Seattle morning. Her body felt heavier than usual, her thoughts slow and scattered. When she stood up, the room tilted slightly. She grabbed the wall for balance, breathing through a wave of nausea. "Maybe I haven't eaten enough," she whispered. But when it happened again the next day, and the next, a cold suspicion crept in. By Thursday, she couldn't ignore it anymore. She went to the pharmacy, her hands shaking, as she paid for the small paper bag. Back in her hotel room, she locked the door and set the bag on the bathroom sink. Inside were 3 pregnancy tests. Minutes later, she sat on the tile floor, the world narrowing to 3 thin plastic sticks lined up on the counter. Positive, positive, positive. Her breath hitched, and tears blurred her vision. She pressed a hand to her stomach, whispering to no one, "Oh, God." Memories flooded in. Nathan's hand over hers on the porch, his voice saying, "You, always you," the night they'd finally chosen love over fear. Now, life was choosing them, in the smallest, most irreversible way. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry, so she did both. The fear came next, sharp, spiraling. How could she raise a child in the middle of heartbreak? And yet beneath the fear was something else, a fragile hope. She stood, wiped her face, and reached for her phone. Her fingers hovered over his name. For a moment, she thought she might delete it. Instead, she typed, "MIA. We need to talk. At home." She stared at the words for a long second, then pressed send. The message delivered instantly. Somewhere across the city, a man who had just given away everything looked down at his phone, and for the first time in days, breathed again. The house felt different that night. Not haunted, not hollow, just waiting. Mia stood by the window of what had once been their room, staring out at the quiet skyline. The familiar scent of rain drifted through the half-open window, mingling with the memories still lingering in the air. She heard the front door open downstairs, soft footsteps echoing through the hallway, and then the voice she hadn't heard in a week, hoarse, hesitant, and human. "Mia?" She turned, calm but unreadable. "You came." Nathan nodded, still standing near the doorway as if unsure he had the right to cross it. "You said we needed to talk. I'm here." Her eyes flicked to the chair near the bed. "Then sit. But before I say anything, I want to know, what did you do?" He blinked. "Do?" "The merger," she said quietly. "What did you do with it?" Nathan exhaled, as though he had been waiting for that question since the moment he walked out of that boardroom. He sat forward, elbows on his knees. "I ended it," he said simply. "Cole Holdings no longer owns Reyes Financial. Your parents have their company back, completely. They keep every cent we invested. I've signed the release contracts, finalized the transfers. It's done." Mia's breath hitched slightly, but she said nothing. Nathan continued, his voice steady but low. "I faced my father. The board called it madness. Maybe it was. But I told them, what good is power if it costs the only thing worth having?" He paused, meeting her eyes. "I accepted losing everything. Except you. That I can't lose." The silence that followed in was heavy and alive. Mia's fingers tightened around the folded papers in her lap. The message she had planned to show him, now trembling in her hands. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft. "You really did it." "I did. For me? For what's right," he said. "But yes, because you taught me how to see the difference." Her eyes filled, though she tried to hold them back. For the first time, she believed him, not because of his words, but because he had traded the only world he'd ever known for something money couldn't buy. She reached into her bag, pulled out 3 small plastic sticks wrapped in tissue, and laid them on the bedspread between them. Nathan frowned, confused. What is that?" She looked at him, tears trembling, but smiling through them. "Proof that life finds a way, even through chaos." He stared for a moment before the truth sank in. "You're pregnant," she finished softly. Nathan froze, blinking as if the air had been pulled out of the room. Then, without warning, he laughed, a short, broken sound, before covering his face with both hands. His shoulders shook once, twice, and then the laughter turned to tears. He looked up at her, eyes shining. "I'm going to be a father?" She nodded. Nathan crossed the space between them in 2 strides, wrapping her in his arms, burying his face in her hair. "God," he whispered, voice breaking. "Thank you." Mia clung to him, the weight of the last 3 years collapsing into relief. He pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. "I promise you," he said hoarsely, "our child will be born into a family built on love, not on a contract, not on fear, on us." She smiled through her tears. "Then keep choosing us, Nathan, every day." "I will," he whispered. "Every single one." Outside, the rain had finally stopped. Months later, the garden behind the Cole residence glowed under strings of soft white lights. Friends and family gathered in a quiet semicircle, their laughter mingling with the scent of roses. It wasn't a grand wedding this time. There were no cameras, no sponsors, no business partners. Just 2 people renewing vows they finally understood. Mia walked slowly down the short path of grass, her hand resting lightly on the gentle curve of her belly. The simple white dress fluttered in the summer breeze, and Nathan, waiting at the end of the aisle, looked at her like he was seeing sunlight for the first time. When she reached him, he took both her hands, trembling slightly. The officiant smiled and stepped back, letting them speak in their own words. Nathan's voice was low but clear. 3 years ago, I made vows that meant nothing. Today, I make new ones, not about duty, but about choice. I promise to choose you again, every day, to protect you, to listen, and to build a life worth handing to our child." Mia's eyes filled, her voice steady when she answered. "And I promise to forgive, to keep learning, to love not because we have to, but because we still want to." When they kissed, the small crowd clapped softly, and for once, Nathan didn't feel like the center of a story. He felt like part of one. 1 year later, the morning light in downtown Seattle poured through the glass walls of a new office space. On the polished marble wall behind the reception desk, a simple plaque read, "Cole and Reyes Global Consulting." Inside, files were stacked neatly on the desk, coffee cups steaming beside open laptops. The company specialized in ethical partnerships, business with a conscience, born from lessons paid in pain. Nathan stood by the window, holding his infant son. Dark hair, bright eyes, already curious about the world. "David," he murmured, smiling down at the baby. "Named after your grandfather. You'll grow up knowing that integrity matters more than wealth." Mia entered the room, a soft glow of calm in her posture. She took the baby from him, resting the child against her shoulder. "You still talk to him like he's a board member," she teased. Nathan chuckled, sliding an arm around her waist. "He'll run this place one day. Might as well start early." She leaned against him, looking out at the skyline. "Do you ever regret it?" He turned to her, brow furrowing. "What? Giving it all up?" She shook her head, smiling faintly. "No, giving me another chance." Nathan smiled, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Not for a second." Her eyes met his, warm and certain. "Good, because this time, we chose each other." The camera of life might have lingered on that moment, 3 silhouettes against the city, framed by sunlight and reflection. A man who once measured everything in profit, a woman who taught him what value really was, and a child who would never have to trade love for security. Outside, the city pulsed with noise and movement. Inside, time stood still, quiet, tender, real. The story that had begun as a contract had finally become a family.